The scream ripped through the quiet evening like shattered glass. Elena Cruz, 6 months pregnant, stumbled backward as a snarling German shepherd lunged at her. Its sharp teeth tore into the hem of her silk maternity dress, inches from her swollen belly. The woman holding the leash, Sabrina Moore, smiled with cruel satisfaction, her perfectly manicured nails tightening as she gave the dog free rein. "Don't move, sweetheart," Sabrina sneered. "He only bites when I tell him to. But maybe tonight, he'll make an exception." Elena's heart pounded wildly. She was trembling, not just from fear for herself, but for the fragile life she carried inside. She screamed for help, her voice echoing across the marble courtyard of the Cruz mansion. Lights flickered on inside the estate, servants peeking nervously from behind curtains, but no one dared intervene. Everyone knew Sabrina was the favored guest now, the one who had Adrian Cruz's protection. And there he was, her husband, Adrian Cruz, the celebrated CEO, tall, polished, the man the world admired for his ruthlessness in business. He stood just beyond the doorway, his eyes cold, his lips curved in something between a smirk and boredom. Elena thought he would shout, rush forward, stop the madness, but instead his voice cut the night air like ice. "Sabrina, enough," he said lazily. "Don't ruin her dress. I paid for it after all." Elena's breath caught in her throat. That was all? No concern for the child? No outrage at the attack? Sabrina pouted, but finally yanked the leash back. The dog growled, its eyes still locked on Elena. She stumbled to the ground, clutching her belly, tears blurring her vision. "Adrian, I'm your wife," she cried out. "I'm carrying your child. How can you let this happen?" But Adrian only adjusted the cufflinks on his expensive suit, glancing at her as if she were a stranger on the street. "You embarrass me," he said coldly. "Always so dramatic. Maybe you should learn your place." A laugh rippled from Sabrina, sharp and mocking. She leaned against Adrian, her hand possessively sliding down his arm. "Don't worry, darling," she whispered loud enough for Elena to hear. "I'll take better care of him than she ever could." The words sliced through Elena like a knife. Her knees buckled. Pain shot through her back. She gasped, unsure if it was the baby or her own breaking heart. She tried to rise, but the weight of betrayal pressed heavier than her body could bear. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, echoing her devastation. Servants shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves, too afraid to act. The night that began as a simple dinner at home had become a nightmare she would never forget. Elena looked at Adrian one last time, searching desperately for a trace of the man she once loved. Instead, she found only cruelty. And then, to her horror, she felt something warm trickle down her leg. Was it blood, or was her baby already in danger? Elena Cruz had once believed her life was the kind of fairy tale every girl dreamed about. Born in a modest neighborhood in San Antonio, Texas, she grew up in a family that worked tirelessly just to make ends meet. Her father drove a delivery truck. Her mother worked long shifts as a nurse. They had little, but they gave Elena what mattered most: love, resilience, and the belief that she could build a brighter future. She was a gifted designer with an eye for detail that turned plain spaces into breathtaking works of art. By 25, she had launched her own interior design studio, winning contracts to renovate luxury apartments across New York. She wasn't rich, but she was proud of her independence. When people asked about her dream, she always said the same thing: to build a home filled with love, not just walls and furniture. That dream seemed to come true the night she met Adrian Cruz. He was magnetic, polished, and ambitious. At first, he treated her like a treasure, sweeping her off her feet with grand gestures, lavish dinners, unexpected trips, and words that promised forever. Elena believed him. She thought he valued her heart, not her income. Within a year, she was wearing a diamond ring on her finger, convinced she had found the man she was destined to love. But marriage changed everything. Adrian, once attentive, grew distant and critical. He belittled her designs, calling her work a hobby. He reminded her that he was the one with the real money, the one who built empires. When Elena became pregnant, she hoped it would heal the cracks in their marriage. Instead, Adrian grew colder, as if the baby was an inconvenience rather than a blessing. Yet Elena held on. She whispered to her unborn child at night, promising that no matter what happened, she would love and protect them. She endured the insults, the silences, and the growing rumors about Adrian's meetings that stretched into the early hours. Deep down, she feared the truth, that he had another woman, but she wasn't ready to face it. That fear became reality when Sabrina Moore appeared. Young, glamorous, and shameless, she flaunted her closeness to Adrian. Servants whispered, business associates smirked, and society's cruel eyes watched as Alina tried to hold her dignity. She told herself she could survive it for the baby's sake. She told herself Adrian would eventually come back to her. But the night Sabrina let the dog loose on her shattered every illusion. The humiliation, the danger, and Adrian's indifference showed Alina who he truly was. For the first time, she realized she was not just a wife discarded, she was a woman fighting for survival. Alone, pregnant, and betrayed, Elena's world was collapsing. But somewhere deep inside, a spark refused to die. She didn't know it yet, but fate was preparing to put someone powerful in her path, someone who would change everything. And as Alina wiped her tears in the dark, clutching her belly for strength, a single thought echoed in her mind. If Adrian wanted her gone, he was about to learn how dangerous a broken woman could become. The Cruz estate was the kind of place that belonged on magazine covers. Perched high above the Hudson River, the mansion spread across acres of manicured lawns, marble fountains, and gardens that bloomed year-round thanks to imported florists and landscapers. Every corner screamed wealth. Crystal chandeliers from Paris, rare paintings that once hung in European castles, and Italian marble floors so polished they reflected like mirrors. To the outside world, the Cruz mansion was a palace of success. But to Alina, it had become a gilded cage. The hallways were wide and echoing, often filled with strangers, Adrian's colleagues, investors, or models hired for his endless events. The laughter that floated through the ballroom no longer sounded like joy to her. It was sharp, brittle, and laced with whispers about her crumbling marriage. She would walk through the same corridors where she had once dreamed of raising her child in peace, only to find Sabrina's perfume lingering in the air, a cruel reminder that her home no longer felt like hers. Adrian thrived in this world. He loved being the center of attention, parading Sabrina at business dinners, brushing off questions with smug smiles. He wore his betrayal like a badge of honor, as if humiliating his wife made him appear stronger in front of powerful men. His empire wasn't just about profits, it was about appearances. Every gala, every ribbon cutting, every charity dinner was a stage where he performed his role as the charming, unstoppable CEO. For Elena, those gatherings were torture. She would sit beside Adrian, her pregnant belly hidden behind flowing gowns, while Sabrina hovered nearby like a shadow that refused to leave. Conversations would pause when Alina entered a room. Some guests offered pitying smiles, others exchanged knowing glances, eager for the drama that swirled around the Cruz marriage. The mansion itself seemed to betray her. The nursery she had lovingly decorated was left untouched, its walls painted soft yellow, the crib standing empty. She often found herself sitting there in silence, hands on her stomach, imagining lullabies and baby laughter. But the reality outside that room was a battlefield, with Adrian and Sabrina flaunting their affair in the very house meant to be her sanctuary. Despite the grandeur, the estate carried an undercurrent of cruelty. Servants avoided Alina's gaze, fearful of Adrian's wrath if they showed sympathy. She ate dinners alone more often than not, while her husband entertained his mistress across town or even in the same house. The mansion's vastness only magnified her loneliness, turning every polished surface into a reminder of the life slipping through her hands. Yet the same setting that witnessed her humiliation would one day witness her triumph. She didn't know it yet, but these halls of betrayal would echo with justice. For now, all she could do was endure, watching her world collapse piece by piece, pretending to be weaker than she truly was. And on the night when Adrian decided to make his betrayal public at the estate's grand ballroom, Elena stood at the top of the staircase, her heart breaking, only to see the man who would change her destiny walk through the door. Who was this powerful stranger, and why did his eyes lock on hers with such intensity? Adrian Cruz had built his reputation on power and appearances. To the business world, he was the ruthless CEO who turned struggling companies into gold. To the press, he was the charismatic leader who charmed investors with a single handshake. To society's elite, he was the man everyone wanted to befriend, the one who always had the best seat at every gala. But behind the polished smiles and tailored suits was a man consumed by greed, vanity, and a hunger that no amount of success could satisfy. Adrian had once been the boy who swept Alina off her feet with promises of love and devotion. But now, he was a husband only in name, bound to her legally but not emotionally. He no longer hid his disdain. He mocked her in front of staff, called her pathetic for crying, and reminded her daily that she was nothing without him. To Adrian, Alina was an accessory he had outgrown, a burden holding him back from the glamorous life he believed he deserved. And then there was Sabrina Moore. At 26, Sabrina was everything Adrian craved: young, seductive, and ruthless. She was a former event coordinator with a sharp eye for opportunity. When she first crossed Adrian's path at a corporate fundraiser, she knew exactly what she wanted, and she set her sights on the CEO. She laughed at his jokes, touched his arm at just the right moments, and whispered flattery that fed his ego. It didn't take long before she had him wrapped around her finger. Sabrina reveled in the power she held. She flaunted her relationship with Adrian, wearing expensive jewelry he bought her, driving cars he leased under the company's name, and posting cryptic photos that hinted at their affair without ever naming him. She didn't care about the whispers in society's circles. In fact, she thrived on them. Every cruel smile she cast Alina's way was proof she had won. Together, Adrian and Sabrina became a spectacle. He paraded her at private dinners, introducing her to influential figures as his business partner, though everyone knew what she truly was. They mocked Alina behind closed doors, calling her weak and boring, convinced she would never fight back. In Sabrina's mind, Alina was disposable, a woman destined to fade into obscurity while she stepped into the spotlight as Adrian's future wife. But power built on cruelty is fragile. Adrian's arrogance blinded him to the storm he was creating. By humiliating Alina publicly and protecting Sabrina even after the dog attack, he didn't just wound his wife, he exposed his true character to those quietly watching. Allies who once admired him began to whisper doubts. Investors questioned his judgment. Servants, once silent, started noticing details they would later reveal. Still, Adrian remained smug, convinced no one could touch him. He believed Alina was too broken to rise, too dependent to survive without his wealth. And Sabrina, intoxicated by her own ambition, pushed him further, urging him to file for divorce and marry her as soon as possible. But in their arrogance, neither saw the trap fate was weaving around them. Their cruelty had lit a fire in Alina, one that would not die until justice was served. And as they clinked glasses at yet another glittering gala, laughing at the woman they thought defeated, neither realized their empire was already crumbling. Because in that same ballroom, Alina was no longer alone, and someone powerful had come to stand at her side. The Bright Horizons Charity Gala was supposed to be a night of elegance, philanthropy, and whispered promises of business deals. The ballroom glittered under golden chandeliers, a sea of tuxedos and gowns shimmering as the city's elite raised glasses of champagne. But for Alina Cruz, it would become the night her dignity was torn apart in front of hundreds of eyes. Adrian entered first, his arm proudly hooked around Sabrina's waist. Gasps rippled through the crowd. But instead of shame, Adrian wore his arrogance like a crown. He leaned down, whispering something into Sabrina's ear that made her laugh. A high, piercing sound that carried across the marble floor. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and investors exchanged knowing smirks. Alina, heavily pregnant, arrived moments later. She had dressed carefully, choosing a midnight blue gown that draped softly over her growing belly, her last attempt to remind Adrian, and perhaps herself, that she was still his wife, still the woman who carried his child. But the moment she stepped into the ballroom, conversations hushed. All eyes turned. Whispers darted like knives. "Isn't that his wife?" someone muttered. "Then who's the woman on his arm?" another replied. "Oh, everyone knows by now," a third voice whispered cruelly. Alina's heart pounded, but she forced herself to hold her head high. She walked across the room, each step heavy, praying Adrian would acknowledge her with even a fraction of respect. Instead, he smirked when he saw her, as if her presence were an inconvenience. "Well," Adrian said loudly, drawing attention, "I suppose we should all be polite. "This is my wife, Elena. She insisted on coming." The word insisted dripped with disdain. Laughter bubbled from Sabrina's lips as she leaned closer to Adrian, her diamond necklace catching the light. "She looks so tired," she whispered, her voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Pregnancy must be hard when you're already so fragile." The crowd tittered. Elena's cheeks burned, her throat tightening as she fought back tears. She turned to Adrian, her voice trembling but steady. "How could you do this to me? To our child? In front of everyone?" Adrian's eyes narrowed, his tone sharp. "Don't make a scene, Elena. You're embarrassing yourself." The words hit harder than any slap. Around her, people whispered, some with pity, most with judgment. She had never felt smaller, more powerless. Her hands instinctively cradled her belly, shielding the one innocent being caught in this nightmare. Sabrina smirked, raising her glass of champagne. "Don't worry, darling," she said, her voice a dagger cloaked in sweetness. "I'll make sure Adrian is well taken care of while you rest." The humiliation was complete. Elena felt the walls closing in, the chandeliers above blurring through tears she refused to let fall. She wanted to scream, to shatter the facade, but her voice caught in her throat. This was the breaking point. Something inside her cracked, not her spirit, but her illusion that Adrian would ever protect her. She turned, ready to flee the ballroom, when she felt a firm, steady hand touch her shoulder. She froze, startled as a deep voice spoke behind her, calm, commanding, and filled with unexpected warmth. "Mrs. Cruz, you don't have to face this alone anymore." The gala lights faded into a blur of gold and white as Elena stumbled out of the ballroom, her breath ragged, her heart pounding. She barely noticed the velvet curtains brushing against her arms or the curious glances of guests as she passed. Her only thought was escape. Escape from Adrian's cold eyes, escape from Sabrina's mocking laugh, escape from the sea of whispers that had pierced her like arrows. She found herself in the marble hallway, empty and echoing. The weight of her humiliation crashed down all at once. Tears spilled freely now, hot and unstoppable, streaking her carefully done makeup. Her chest heaved as she pressed her back against the wall, clutching her swollen belly as if it were the only anchor keeping her from crumbling completely. "How did I get here?" she whispered to herself, her voice broken. Just a few years ago, she had believed she'd found her forever. She had built her life around Adrian, given up opportunities, silenced her doubts, and carried his child. And for what? To be mocked, discarded, and replaced by a younger woman with no shame? The pain was unbearable. Not just the sting of betrayal, but the bone-deep fear that she had no one left. She thought of her parents, long gone. She thought of her friends, most of whom had drifted away once Adrian pulled her into his world of wealth and control. She thought of the staff at the mansion, too frightened of Adrian to ever stand by her side. She was utterly alone. Her sobs echoed in the hallway, muffled by her hand as she tried to quiet herself. But no matter how she tried, the images replayed. Adrian's smirk, Sabrina's cruel toast, the laughter of strangers who delighted in her suffering. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold marble floor, her body shaking, her gown pooling around her like a discarded dream. For the first time, she wondered if Adrian was right. Was she weak? Was she pathetic? Was she clinging to a marriage that had long since died? Was she destined to be nothing more than a discarded wife, raising a child in shame? The thoughts clawed at her, threatening to drag her into a darkness she feared she would never escape. And yet, beneath the despair, a flicker of something stirred. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the faint kick of her baby. It was a reminder. She wasn't alone. She had a reason to keep fighting, no matter how broken she felt. But at that moment, she didn't feel strong. She felt like a ghost of herself, shattered in pieces too sharp to put back together. She let her head fall into her hands, sobbing until her body ached. Then, through her tears, she heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the hallway. A shadow fell across her, tall and imposing. She looked up, startled, her vision blurred by tears, and there he was, the stranger from the ballroom, his eyes steady, filled not with pity but with something else entirely. He extended his hand toward her. "Elena," he said firmly, as if he already knew her pain, "this is not the end of your story." For a long moment, Elena simply stared at the man standing over her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of power that seemed to command the very space around him. His presence was calm yet overwhelming, the kind that silenced doubts without a single word. His hand remained extended, steady and patient, waiting for her to take it. She hesitated, her body still trembling from the humiliation she had endured. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice raw. The man crouched slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "My name is Victor Blackwell," he said evenly. The name alone made Elena's breath hitch. Everyone in New York knew that name. Victor Blackwell, the billionaire investor, the man who built an empire so vast that even Adrian Cruz, with all his arrogance, tread carefully when his name came up. He was as powerful as he was reclusive, rarely seen at social gatherings, his fortune whispered about in hushed tones. "What do you want from me?" Elena asked, her voice quivering between suspicion and desperation. Victor studied her for a moment, his eyes not filled with pity, but something sharper. "Recognition. I don't want anything from you," he replied. "I saw what happened in there, and I've seen enough men like Adrian to know where this story ends if you don't fight back." Elena shook her head, overwhelmed. "Fight back? I'm pregnant. I have nothing. He has everything. Money, power, lawyers. He'll destroy me if I try." Victor's jaw tightened, his expression darkening. "No, he only has what people allow him to keep. Men like Adrian thrive because women like you are silenced. But you are not weak, Elena. You are not finished. You still have something Adrian can never take from you." Her brows furrowed. "What could I possibly have?" "Truth," Victor said simply, "and dignity, and the will to protect your child. That is more powerful than any fortune." The words struck her like lightning, igniting a spark she thought had died inside her. For the first time in months, someone wasn't mocking her, dismissing her, or telling her to accept her place. This man, a billionaire who owed her nothing, was looking at her as if she mattered, as if she was more than Adrian's discarded wife. Still, fear clawed at her chest. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. Victor's expression softened, though his eyes remained fierce. "Because I know what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trusted. And because Adrian Cruz has made enemies, he doesn't even realize. You're not alone anymore, Elena, not if you choose to stand." She stared at his outstretched hand, torn between despair and the fragile thread of hope he offered. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, grounding her, pulling her back from the edge of collapse. For the first time that night, Elena rose to her feet, not just physically but in spirit. Something had shifted. She wasn't sure what path lay ahead. But she knew one thing with certainty: she would no longer suffer in silence. Victor leaned closer, his voice low but steady. "Adrian thinks he's untouchable. Let's prove him wrong." The following morning, sunlight streamed through the wide windows of Victor Blackwell's penthouse overlooking Central Park. Elena sat on a velvet armchair, her hands resting protectively on her belly, still trying to process the whirlwind of the night before. She had left the gala in Victor's car, shielded from the flashing cameras that hungrily tried to capture her shame. For the first time in weeks, she had slept without waking in terror. Victor entered the room, carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one gently on the table in front of her. "Chamomile," he said. "Good for the nerves." Elena murmured her thanks, her voice fragile. "I don't understand why you're doing this. You don't even know me." Victor sat opposite her, his sharp suit and controlled demeanor exuding quiet authority. "I know enough. I saw the way Adrian treated you. I've seen it too many times, the arrogance of men who believe wealth gives them the right to destroy lives. And I've watched women like you rise from the ashes when they realize they're stronger than they ever knew." Elena lowered her eyes, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "I don't feel strong. Last night, I felt like I was dying inside." "Good," Victor replied firmly, though not unkindly. "Because that's the moment real strength begins. The moment you refuse to let yourself be broken again. You've hit the bottom, Elena. Now it's time to rise." His words lingered in her chest, igniting a fire she had buried under fear and humiliation. For the first time, she dared to imagine a life not defined by Adrian's cruelty. Over the next weeks, Victor became more than a rescuer. He became a mentor, a steady force guiding her back to herself. He introduced her to trusted advisors, lawyers who explained her rights, doctors who monitored her pregnancy with genuine care, stylists who helped her reclaim confidence through her appearance. Slowly, Alina began to see the reflection in the mirror shift. No longer the broken wife hiding her pain, but a woman learning to stand tall again. Victor also pushed her to reclaim her career. "Your designs," he said one evening, spreading her old sketches across the table, "are extraordinary. Don't let him erase your talent. You had dreams before Adrian. It's time to take them back." Elena's hands trembled as she touched the drawings she had abandoned, memories of passion and ambition flooding back. She realized she had sacrificed too much for a man who gave her nothing but betrayal. Day by day, she grew stronger. She smiled again. She laughed softly when Victor teased her stubbornness. She even dared to plan for her child's future with hope instead of dread. But beneath her growing strength, a darker determination brewed. The humiliation she had endured was unforgivable. Adrian and Sabrina had mocked her, nearly endangered her baby, and paraded their affair without shame. Elena knew she could never truly move forward until she confronted them. And one evening, as Victor studied her across the table, she lifted her chin, her eyes burning with resolve. "It's not enough to survive," she said. "I want them to pay." 3 weeks later, the city buzzed with anticipation for the annual Metropolitan Arts Gala, a glittering event where the wealthiest and most influential gathered beneath crystal chandeliers to flaunt power disguised as philanthropy. For Adrian Cruz, it was another stage to showcase his empire, and Sabrina Moore, the mistress, he paraded as if she were already his wife. He arrived in a tailored white tuxedo, Sabrina on his arm in a daring scarlet gown. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing every smug smile, every stolen kiss she offered him for the world to see. Reporters clamored for quotes, society pages ready to crown them as the evening's power couple. Adrian soaked in the attention, basking in the illusion of victory. But victory was about to crumble, because that same night, Elena Cruz was making her return. Inside the gala's grand entrance, a hush fell as the doors swung open. Photographers froze, their cameras momentarily stunned by the vision before them. Elena stepped onto the marble floor, radiant in a sleek black gown that accentuated her pregnancy like a crown, not a burden. Her hair fell in soft waves, her makeup subtle yet commanding. She was no longer the broken woman whispered about in pity. She was luminous, regal, untouchable. And at her side walked Victor Blackwell. His presence alone commanded silence. Dressed in a midnight suit, sharp and imposing, he offered Elena his arm with quiet dignity. The symbolism was unmistakable. The world's most private billionaire had chosen to appear publicly, not alone, but with Elena Cruz. Together, they were a vision of strength, defiance, and quiet revenge. The cameras exploded back to life. "Elena! Elena! Over here! Victor, are you two together? Is this your first appearance as a couple?" Elena didn't flinch. She lifted her chin and gave the faintest smile, her hand resting gracefully on Victor's arm. The effect was electric. In an instant, the whispers shifted. No longer was she the discarded wife. Now, she was the woman who had risen, the woman powerful enough to stand beside Victor Blackwell himself. Across the room, Adrian froze. His smirk faltered, replaced with disbelief, then rage. Sabrina tightened her grip on his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "What is she doing here?" she hissed. "And why with him?" Adrian's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as he watched Elena glide through the crowd with Victor, the guests parting for them like royalty. For the first time, Adrian wasn't the center of attention. He was being eclipsed by the very woman he had tried to destroy. Elena could feel his stare burning into her, but she didn't falter. Every step was a declaration. She was no longer his victim. She was stronger, brighter, untouchable, and she wanted him to feel the weight of it. As she reached the heart of the ballroom, Victor leaned close, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "They're watching, Elena. Make sure they never forget this moment." She exhaled slowly, her eyes locking with Adrian's across the room, her lips curved into the faintest, coldest smile. And with that smile, Adrian realized his wife was no longer his weakness. She was about to become his greatest threat. The gala hummed with conversation. But the moment Elena and Victor entered, all eyes shifted toward them. It wasn't just their appearance, it was the aura of power they carried together. Guests whispered behind jeweled hands, some with admiration, others with envy. The discarded wife had returned, not in shame, but in triumph. Adrian Cruz, however, was seething. He clenched his champagne glass so tightly that the stem snapped, shards cutting into his palm. Sabrina gasped, trying to dab the blood with a napkin, but Adrian shoved her hand away. His gaze was locked on Elena, his pride boiling into fury. He stormed across the marble floor, the crowd instinctively parting to let him through. "Elena!" he barked, his voice echoing over the orchestra's soft music. "What the hell is this?" Elena stood tall, her hand resting lightly on Victor's arm. She didn't flinch, didn't cower the way she once would have. Instead, she met Adrian's rage with icy calm. "This," she said evenly, "is me reclaiming my dignity." Adrian's face flushed crimson. "Dignity?" he spat. "You humiliate me by parading around with him? You're still my wife, Elena. Don't forget that." The crowd gasped at his outburst. Some whispered about his arrogance. Others exchanged glances, sensing the unraveling of a man who had once seemed untouchable. Victor stepped forward, his presence towering. His voice was calm but laced with steel. "Careful, Cruz. You've already proven to everyone here how little you value your wife. Don't make the mistake of underestimating her now." Adrian sneered. "Stay out of this, Blackwell. This is between me and my wife." Victor's gaze hardened. "No. It stopped being just between you two the moment you allowed another woman to endanger her and your child. Everyone in this room knows what you've done. And now Elena has chosen to stand beside me. That should tell you everything you need to know." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, eyes wide. For the first time, Adrian wasn't holding the stage. Victor and Elena were. Adrian's fists trembled. "You think you can take her from me? You think parading her around makes her strong? She's nothing without me." Elena's voice rang out, clear and steady. "I was nothing because of you, Adrian, but not anymore." The words hit him harder than any slap. He staggered back, his pride cracking under the weight of public humiliation. Sabrina tried to pull him away, whispering frantically, but Adrian shook her off, his eyes wild with desperation. "You'll regret this," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Both of you. You think this is over? I'll destroy you, Elena. And you, Blackwell, you'll regret ever crossing me." Victor stepped closer, his shadow falling over Adrian, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "No, Cruz. The days of you destroying her are finished. You should be more concerned about what happens when the truth comes out." Adrian's eyes flickered with unease, though his pride forced him to sneer. "What truth?" Victor's lips curved into the faintest smirk. He leaned close enough for only Adrian to hear. "The kind that ends careers and marriages." The gala had shifted from glittering celebration to tense theater. Guests clustered in small circles, whispering furiously as they watched Adrian Cruz and Victor Blackwell stand face to face. Elena, radiant and composed, stood at Victor's side, her presence only intensifying the drama. Adrian's voice dripped with venom. "You think you can scare me with vague threats, Victor? I built my empire with my own two hands. No one touches me." Victor didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm, measured tone carried further than Adrian's bluster. "You built nothing but a castle of lies, Cruz, and unlike you, I don't make accusations I can't prove." The crowd buzzed. Phones discreetly lifted to record the confrontation, eager to capture every word. Adrian's bravado wavered under the spotlight of so many eyes. "You're bluffing," he muttered, though his clenched fists betrayed his unease. Victor slipped a small folder from the inside of his jacket. He placed it on the nearest table with deliberate care, the sound of paper against glass echoing louder than the orchestra's music. "In here," Victor said smoothly, "are records of fraudulent transfers, shell companies hidden offshore, and falsified contracts tied directly to Cruz Enterprises. All traced back to you." Gasps spread through the ballroom. Elena's heart pounded as she watched Adrian's face drain of color. For years she had suspected his shady dealings, but seeing the evidence in Victor's hands was like watching a mask finally ripped away. Adrian lunged forward, snatching the folder and clutching it to his chest. "Lies. Forgeries. You think anyone will believe this trash?" Victor raised a brow. "Believe it? Cruz, I've already handed copies to 3 members of your board, your chief financial officer, and a rather eager journalist who happens to be in this very room." Heads whipped toward the crowd. Sure enough, a reporter from the New York Chronicle stood frozen, his phone buzzing with incoming files. The color drained from Adrian's face further, sweat beading on his forehead. "You bastard," Adrian hissed. "You planned this." Victor's lips curved into a razor-thin smile. No, Cruz, you planned your own downfall the moment you betrayed the woman standing beside me. I simply gave the world the proof it needed. Elena felt a surge of vindication. For the first time, Adrian wasn't the one holding power over her. He was crumbling, exposed, cornered in front of the very society he once ruled. Sabrina clutched Adrian's arm, her voice sharp with panic. Adrian, do something. Don't just stand here. Fix this. But Adrian had no fix. His empire, his pride, his entire facade was unraveling in real time. The whispers around the room grew louder. Investors already calculating losses, socialites already distancing themselves from the sinking ship of Cruz Enterprises. Victor leaned in slightly, his voice low but carrying. This is only the beginning. The law will have its turn with you. But tonight, I want everyone to see the man you truly are, a coward who hides behind money and mistresses. Adrian's face twisted in rage. He opened his mouth to retort, but before he could speak, a voice rang out from the back of the ballroom. Firm. Clear. Official. Adrian Cruz, we need to have a word about your finances. The ballroom froze as the authoritative voice echoed through the air. A pair of men in dark suits stepped forward, badges flashing briefly under the chandelier light. Their presence was undeniable. Federal investigators. A murmur rippled across the crowd, gasps blending with hurried whispers as the reality sank in. Adrian Cruz was cornered. Adrian's jaw clenched so tightly it looked as though his teeth might crack. You've got the wrong man, he barked, his voice cracking with panic disguised as outrage. I'm Adrian Cruz. I fund half the charities in this city. Do you have any idea who I am? But the room wasn't impressed. The once revered CEO now looked like a desperate man clinging to a collapsing throne. Cameras clicked furiously as reporters captured every second of his unraveling. Elena watched with a mixture of fear and grim satisfaction. She had spent years silenced by this man's cruelty, but now the entire world was witnessing his downfall. Yet something in Adrian's eyes unsettled her. It wasn't just panic, it was rage. Sabrina tugged on his arm, her voice frantic. Adrian, please, we need to leave. We can fix this later. Shut up, Adrian roared, shoving her so hard she stumbled into a waiter, glasses crashing to the floor. Gasps filled the ballroom again, outrage sweeping through the guests. Sabrina clutched her arm, stunned and humiliated, the perfect picture of a mistress discarded as quickly as she had been flaunted. Victor stepped forward, his tone steady. Enough, Cruz. Every second you stand here, you dig yourself deeper. But Adrian snapped, his composure shattering completely. He lunged toward Victor, his fist raised, spittle flying from his lips. You think you can take everything from me? You think you can humiliate me in front of my city? Victor moved swiftly, intercepting the blow, his grip locking around Adrian's wrist with unshakable strength. Gasps erupted as the two men stood locked, power against desperation, strength against madness. Victor's voice dropped low, deadly calm. I didn't take anything, Cruz. You destroyed yourself. Adrian's eyes darted wildly, sweat dripping down his face. He yanked free, his movements erratic, unhinged. He seized a wine bottle from a nearby table and smashed it against the edge. Jagged glass glinting in his trembling hand. Guests screamed and backed away, tables overturned in the chaos. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Her hands instinctively shielded her belly as she stumbled back, terror flooding her veins. Adrian's gaze snapped to her, the broken bottle shaking in his grip. You, he shouted. This is your fault. You turned them all against me. Victor immediately stepped between them, shielding Elena with his body. You won't touch her, he growled. The investigators moved closer, hands hovering near their weapons, waiting for the right moment to strike. The orchestra had gone silent, leaving only the sound of Adrian's ragged breathing and the frantic shuffling of terrified guests. For a brief second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Adrian's hand shook, the broken bottle wavering as if torn between violence and surrender. And then, with a guttural scream, Adrian lunged forward, straight toward Victor and Elena. The jagged glass arcs downward, inches from the woman he had once vowed to protect. Time slowed as Adrian lunged forward, the jagged glass glinting under the chandelier. Elena's scream tore through the ballroom, her arms instinctively wrapping around her belly. In that split second, every guest in the room witnessed the unthinkable. A husband turned predator, ready to harm the very woman carrying his child. But Victor Blackwell was faster. With reflexes honed by years of calculated discipline, Victor grabbed Adrian's wrist mid-swing, twisting sharply until the bottle shattered from his grip. The shards clattered harmlessly to the marble floor. Gasps erupted as Victor shoved Adrian backward, his voice calm but thunderous. "Touch her again, and you'll never see daylight." The room exploded into chaos. Security rushed forward, guests scrambled to the edges of the hall, and Sabrina, pale and trembling, shrieked as she realized the man she had clung to was unraveling before the entire city's elite. Adrian staggered, clutching his arm, his face twisted with fury and humiliation. "You can't do this to me," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I am Adrian Cruz. I built everything, everything you see. None of you would be here without me." But no one listened. The spell he had cast over society was broken. Investors who once praised him now looked on with disgust. Former allies whispered, already calculating how to distance themselves from his collapsing empire. The cameras, still flashing, immortalized his disgrace. The investigators seized their chance. One stepped forward, voice firm. "Adrian Cruz, you're coming with us? Now." Adrian thrashed, his pride refusing to surrender. "No, you can't take me. She's lying. He's framing me." His wild eyes darted toward Elena, venom dripping from every word. "You'll regret this, Elena. You and your bastard child." Before he could finish, Victor's fist connected with his jaw. The sound cracked through the ballroom like thunder. Adrian crumpled to the floor, groaning, his arrogance shattered as thoroughly as the bottle he'd wielded. A cheer rose from the crowd, tentative at first, then louder, cathartic. For years they had watched Adrian dominate with arrogance and cruelty. But tonight, justice had struck him down. Elena stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief that Victor had stopped him, that she and her baby were safe. Victor turned to her, his hand steady on her shoulder. "You're safe now. I promise. He'll never hurt you again." Security restrained Adrian, dragging him toward the exit as reporters shouted questions, cameras capturing every humiliating step. Sabrina, abandoned and furious, shouted after him, "Adrian, do something! Don't let them take you!" But he didn't answer. For the first time, Adrian Cruz was silent, powerless, broken. Elena exhaled shakily, her knees nearly buckling. She clung to Victor's arm, the weight of the night pressing down on her. The ballroom slowly returned to order, guests whispering in awe at what they had just witnessed. But Victor's eyes narrowed as he glanced around the room. He knew Adrian's downfall was only the beginning. Men like him didn't go down quietly. And as Elena wiped her tears, a chilling thought crossed her mind. If Adrian couldn't destroy her in public, what would he try in the shadows? The news broke before dawn. Headlines blared across every screen. CEO Adrian Cruz arrested at gala after violent outburst. Images of Adrian being dragged away in handcuffs flooded social media, his once polished image shattered in an instant. Investors fled, stocks plummeted, and Cruz Enterprises began to crumble under the weight of scandal. For Elena, it should have been a moment of relief. But instead of celebrating, she found herself awake in Victor's penthouse, staring out at the city skyline with a heaviness in her chest. Justice had begun, yes, but she knew Adrian's pride would not let him stay silent behind bars. Men like him always found a way to strike back. Victor approached quietly, setting a cup of warm tea on the table beside her. "He's been denied bail," he said, his voice calm. "For now, he can't touch you." Elena nodded, though the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. "For now," she whispered. "But what happens when he gets out? He hates me, Victor, and he's dangerous." Victor's gaze softened. "Then we make sure he never gets the chance. His empire is collapsing, the evidence is strong, and I'll use every resource I have to protect you and your child." Her heart swelled with gratitude, though fear still lingered. She reached down, feeling the faint kick of her baby, a reminder of why she had to stay strong. "I don't just want protection anymore," she said, her voice steady. "I want to rebuild. For me, for my child. I can't let Adrian's shadow define us." Victor gave a small, approving nod. "Then that's what we'll do." Meanwhile, in a dingy apartment across town, Sabrina Moore was unraveling. Her glamorous life had crumbled overnight. The tabloids that once praised her beauty now labeled her the mistress who stood by a monster. Doors that had opened easily for her were now slammed shut. Friends who once envied her designer gowns now refused to answer her calls. She paced the room, mascara smeared, her hands trembling as she scrolled through her phone. "Adrian promised me everything," she muttered bitterly. "He said she'd be gone, that I'd have it all. But now she had nothing. No mansion, no fortune, no protection. And yet her bitterness festered into resolve. She remembered the humiliation of being shoved aside at the gala, discarded in front of everyone. She hated Adrian for it. But she hated Elena more. For surviving, for shining, for walking into that ballroom on Victor Blackwell's arm like a queen reborn. "No," Sabrina hissed, her reflection in the cracked mirror cold and unrecognizable. "She doesn't get to win, not after everything." As Cruz Enterprises spiraled, subpoenas stacked against Adrian, and reporters swarmed outside the courthouse, Elena found herself standing taller. She had started sketching designs again, her passion slowly returning. Victor encouraged her, reminding her that her talent was her future, not Adrian's money. For the first time in months, she felt hope. But even as she began to rebuild, shadows lingered. Because across the city, Sabrina was planning, and she was dangerous in her desperation. Elena laid a hand over her belly and whispered softly, "I'll protect you, no matter what." But deep down, she knew the storm wasn't over. Because Sabrina was about to make her next move, and it would be deadlier than anything Adrian had tried. Weeks passed, and for the first time in years, Elena felt the taste of freedom. Without Adrian's shadow hovering over her, she began to rediscover the woman she once was. Her days were no longer filled with tears or whispered fears of betrayal. Instead, she spent mornings sketching designs, afternoons meeting with Victor's contacts in the design industry, and evenings preparing for the arrival of her baby. Victor had insisted she set up a small studio in his penthouse. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating her sketches scattered across the desk. Elena picked up a pencil and smiled as she traced bold lines across the page. Each stroke felt like healing, like reclaiming a piece of herself Adrian had tried to erase. "You haven't lost your touch," Victor said one evening, stepping into the studio with his usual quiet confidence. He studied her sketches, genuine admiration in his eyes. "These designs are stronger, more alive than anything I've seen in years." Elena blushed, shaking her head. "They're just ideas. I don't even know if anyone would want them." "They will," Victor replied firmly. "And when you're ready, I'll make sure the right people see them." "This isn't just about revenge anymore, Elena. This is about building the life you and your child deserve." Her heart warmed at his words. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was creating again. But across town, Sabrina was spiraling deeper into her bitterness. She had traded the marble halls of Adrian's mansion for a cramped apartment with peeling paint and unpaid bills. Her designer gowns had been sold off piece by piece, just to cover rent. Every time she saw Elena's face in the papers, glowing, dignified, standing beside Victor, her rage boiled hotter. One night, Sabrina sat at her cluttered table, scrolling through endless articles about Adrian's downfall. Her lipstick-stained wineglass trembled in her hand. "She thinks she's won," she muttered, her voice dripping with venom. "But she has no idea who she's dealing with." Her eyes landed on a photo of Elena leaving Victor's penthouse, radiant even in her simplicity. At her side, a bodyguard opened the door. The detail caught Sabrina's attention. If Victor was protecting her, it meant Elena was vulnerable enough to need protection. Vulnerable, but not untouchable. That night, Sabrina began making calls to old contacts, shady acquaintances, anyone desperate enough to do her bidding for the right price. She didn't care about Adrian anymore. He had humiliated her too. All she cared about was watching Elena fall. Back at the penthouse, Elena rocked gently in a chair, her hand over her belly, humming softly to the baby she carried. She was beginning to believe in second chances, to feel hope bloom again. Victor had even spoken of hosting an exhibition of her designs once she was ready. For the first time in months, the future didn't feel frightening. But fate had a cruel sense of timing. While Elena dreamed of new beginnings, Sabrina was setting her trap. And she wasn't planning just humiliation this time. She was planning something that could cost Elena everything, including her unborn child. The city glowed with evening lights, skyscrapers shimmering like jewels against the night sky. Elena had just finished a productive day in her studio. She was tired, but it was the kind of exhaustion that came with fulfillment rather than despair. Her sketches were stacked neatly, ready for Victor to review. For the first time in so long, she felt she was building something of her own again. Yet outside the safety of Victor's penthouse, danger stirred. Sabrina Moore's obsession had reached its peak. She had spent weeks plotting, her mind consumed by a single mission: to see Elena Cruz destroyed. In a smoky bar on the Lower East Side, Sabrina met with two men whose reputations were as stained as their whiskey glasses. "It's simple," she hissed, sliding a stack of cash across the table. "I want her scared. I want her humiliated, and if the baby gets in the way, well, accidents happen." One of the men raised a brow. "You sure about this, lady? You're talking about a pregnant woman." Sabrina's eyes glittered with venom. "She stole everything from me. Don't ask questions, just do it." The men exchanged a glance, greed overtaking hesitation. The deal was sealed. Back in the penthouse, Elena prepared for a charity luncheon Victor had encouraged her to attend. "You should be seen again," he told her. "Not as Adrian's ex-wife, but as Elena Cruz, the designer, the mother, the woman who survived." Elena hesitated at first. The thought of facing more cameras, more whispers, still frightened her. But she also knew Victor was right. If she was going to rebuild her life, she couldn't hide forever. So she agreed. On the morning of the event, Elena slipped into a pale ivory dress, simple yet elegant. Victor arranged for a car and security, but Elena insisted on something modest. "I don't want to look like I'm hiding behind guards," she said gently. "I want to walk in on my own terms." Victor frowned but respected her decision. "Fine, but I'll be nearby if anything happens." The luncheon was held at a boutique hotel downtown, filled with journalists, philanthropists, and society figures. Elena entered with grace, her confidence radiating as she shook hands and exchanged smiles. She spoke about her plans to relaunch her design studio, about hope, about resilience. For the first time, applause followed her instead of whispers. But lurking in the shadows across the street, Sabrina's hired men waited. One clutched a small vial of liquid meant to spill on Elena's dress, staged as a clumsy accident. The other carried something far worse in his jacket pocket, a weapon that glinted under the dim streetlight. Elena stepped outside after the event, sunlight dancing on her hair, her hand protectively cradling her belly. She smiled as reporters snapped photos, her confidence stronger than ever. She didn't notice the two men crossing the street toward her. And then, from the corner of her eye, she caught the reflection of steel. Something cold and sharp was moving straight toward her. The crowd outside the luncheon clapped politely as Elena thanked the reporters and began making her way toward the waiting car. She felt lighter, stronger. Each step a declaration that she was no longer defined by Adrian's betrayal. But in the blur of flashing cameras, she didn't notice the two men cutting through the crowd with deadly intent. One of them slipped a hand into his jacket, fingers brushing the cold steel hidden inside. The other uncapped the small vial of liquid, ready to spill it across Elena's dress, creating chaos that would distract her from the real danger. But Victor Blackwell had been watching. From across the street, his sharp eyes caught the unnatural movements, the way the men advanced with purpose. His instinct screamed. Without hesitation, he pushed through the crowd, his tall frame cutting a path straight toward Elena. "Elena!" he shouted. She turned just as one of the men lunged. The vial tipped, liquid splattering harmlessly onto the pavement. The second man raised the weapon, glinting under the sun, aiming for Elena's side. Before it could strike, Victor intercepted. His hand shot out, grabbing the man's wrist with unyielding strength. The weapon clattered to the ground, bouncing across the pavement. Gasps erupted as bystanders screamed, some ducking for cover, others filming with trembling phones. The attacker snarled, swinging wildly, but Victor's fist connected with his jaw, sending him crashing into the hotel steps. The other man tried to run, but security closed in, pinning him before he could escape. Elena stood frozen, her hands instinctively over her belly, her breath ragged. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashing furiously, capturing every second of the attempted attack and Victor's dramatic rescue. Victor turned, his hands gripping Elena's shoulders firmly. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, but my baby? You're safe," he said, steady and certain. "I won't let anyone touch you." Police sirens wailed in the distance, the sound of justice racing toward the scene. Officers swarmed quickly, restraining the men and collecting the weapon. The crowd buzzed with shock and awe, already speculating who could have ordered such a brazen attack. Elena's fear gave way to fury. She knew exactly who was behind it: Sabrina. This wasn't Adrian's style. This was the work of a desperate woman with nothing left to lose. Sure enough, hours later, as the attackers were dragged into custody, one of them cracked under questioning. They revealed the name of the woman who had hired them: Sabrina Moore. The news spread like wildfire. The same tabloids that once glorified Sabrina's beauty now plastered her name under headlines dripping with scandal. Mistress plots attack on pregnant wife. In her dingy apartment, Sabrina screamed at the television, smashing a glass against the wall. Lies! They're all lies! But the panic in her eyes betrayed the truth. The world was turning against her. Back in the safety of Victor's penthouse, Elena sat shaken but resolute. She had nearly lost everything today. It was no longer about humiliation or whispers. This was war. She lifted her gaze to Victor, her eyes burning with determination. "No more running," she said. "It's time we finish this." The city awoke the next morning to headlines that shook every corner of high society. Adrian Cruz indicted on fraud charges. Mistress Sabrina Moore linked to attack on pregnant wife. Images of Adrian in an orange jumpsuit and Sabrina in handcuffs splashed across every screen. Their empire of arrogance had collapsed in a single night. But Elena wasn't satisfied with survival. She wanted justice. And with Victor by her side, she finally had the strength to demand it. Inside a packed courtroom, reporters lined the benches, eager for every word. Adrian sat at the defense table, his once pristine suit replaced by prison garb, his face pale and gaunt. Sabrina was seated a few rows behind him, her once flawless glamour reduced to smudged makeup and trembling hands. The mistress and the mogul, both exposed, both despised. The prosecutor laid out the evidence with surgical precision: years of fraudulent transfers, shell companies, bribes, and tax evasion. The documents Victor had uncovered painted a picture too detailed to deny. Adrian's empire hadn't been built on genius, it had been built on lies. Then came the testimony. One by one, former employees spoke of Adrian's cruelty, his threats, his shady deals. Investors admitted they had been misled. And finally, the police officers who had arrested Sabrina's hired men testified, naming her as the one who ordered the attack on Elena. Elena sat silently beside Victor, her hands folded over her belly, her strength radiating through the room. Every word spoken wasn't just about numbers or crimes. It was about the years of abuse, humiliation, and betrayal she had endured. Adrian slammed his fist on the table, his voice cracking with desperation. "This is a conspiracy. She set me up. She wanted to destroy me." He pointed at Elena, his eyes wild. "She's nothing without me. Nothing." The judge's gavel struck sharply. "Enough, Mr. Cruz. The only one who destroyed you is yourself." Sabrina broke then, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she sobbed, her voice echoing across the courtroom. "He promised me everything. He said she'd be gone." Elena finally stood, her voice calm but firm. "You both underestimated me. You thought betrayal would break me, but I'm still standing, and I will raise my child free from your shadows." The crowd erupted into whispers, cameras flashing furiously. Adrian's head dropped, the fight draining out of him. Sabrina buried her face in her hands, her sobs drowned by the noise. The judge's final words sealed their fate. "Adrian Cruz, you are hereby sentenced to federal prison. Sabrina Moore, you will face charges of conspiracy and attempted assault. This court stands adjourned." As the gavel fell, the world watched Adrian led away in chains, his once proud stride reduced to a shuffle. Sabrina was dragged out weeping, her dreams of luxury turning into a nightmare of cell bars and disgrace. Elena closed her eyes, exhaling a breath she felt she'd been holding for years. The weight was lifting. Justice had been served. But when she opened her eyes, Victor was watching her closely. His expression wasn't relief, it was concern. Because even as Adrian and Sabrina fell, another threat was waiting in the shadows. Months passed since the courtroom showdown. Adrian Cruz sat in federal prison, stripped of power, his empire auctioned off piece by piece. Sabrina Moore lived in disgrace, her name a curse in society, her life reduced to cold cement walls and prison uniforms. Their downfall was complete. But for Elena, life was beginning again. Victor's penthouse had transformed into a home filled with warmth. The once sterile halls now carried the gentle hum of lullabies and the soft glow of nightlights. Elena's studio was alive with sketches pinned to the walls, colors and textures that reflected not just design, but her journey back to herself. And then came the moment she had been waiting for, the day her child entered the world. It was a stormy night, rain streaking across the glass windows, when Elena went into labor. Victor rushed her to the hospital, never leaving her side. Hours of pain gave way to the sweetest cry, a sound that brought tears to Elena's eyes. The nurse placed a tiny bundle in her arms. "A boy," the nurse whispered. Elena looked down at her son, his eyes blinking open, his tiny hand curling around her finger. "My angel," she breathed, tears of joy spilling freely. For the first time in years, her heart felt whole. Victor stood beside her, his usually composed expression softened. He brushed a tear from Elena's cheek. "He's perfect," he said. The following weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and tender moments. Elena rocked her son to sleep, whispered promises of love, and sketched designs while he lay in a cradle beside her. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living, thriving, creating a future for herself and her child. Victor became more than an ally. He was present, attentive, a steady presence who ensured she never felt alone again. He didn't replace what she had lost, he helped her build something new. Slowly, Elena began to imagine a life filled not with pain, but with hope, maybe even love. But just as peace began to settle, shadows crept back in. One evening, while Elena rocked her son near the window, Victor returned from a meeting, his expression unusually tense. He kissed her forehead, but his jaw was tight. "What is it?" Elena asked, sensing the storm behind his silence. Victor hesitated, then spoke carefully. "There's chatter. Someone on the outside is moving money, contacting people tied to Adrian. He might be behind bars, but he still has loyalists, people who want revenge on his behalf." Elena's stomach tightened. She looked down at her son, her arms tightening around him. "You mean, even in prison, he's still trying to hurt me?" Victor's eyes were steady, protective. "I'll keep you safe, both of you. But we can't underestimate the reach of a desperate man." Elena's heart pounded. She had fought so hard, endured so much, and now she finally had her child in her arms. She would not let Adrian or anyone take this peace away. She kissed her son's forehead, whispering fiercely, "No one will ever touch you. Not while I'm alive." But even as she vowed to protect him, a shadow lingered in Victor's eyes. Because the final battle wasn't over, and Adrian's last strike was still to come. The night was calm, the city lights twinkling beneath the penthouse windows, but Elena felt the tension in the air. Victor's words echoed in her mind. Adrian still had loyalists, and they were moving in the shadows. Even from prison, he was trying to reach her. That fear became reality one evening, when a black SUV was spotted idling near the building. Victor's security intercepted the men inside, mercenaries, paid off by one of Adrian's offshore accounts. They were heavily armed, their orders clear. Kidnap Elena, use the baby as leverage, and force Victor to back off from finishing Adrian's corporate dismantling. But Victor had anticipated it. He had laid the trap. The men were arrested before they could even step out of the vehicle. Evidence tied the plot directly to Adrian's hidden network, exposing the last threads of his influence. Word traveled fast to the prison where Adrian sat, and the news hit him harder than any sentence. His loyalists had failed, his empire was gone, and the woman he had tried to destroy was untouchable. Meanwhile, Sabrina, already serving her time, was dragged back into court after confessing to aiding the plot. Her desperation for relevance had sealed her fate. She broke down in front of the judge, sobbing that Adrian had used her, that she had ruined her life for nothing. The world watched with little sympathy. She had become a cautionary tale. Beauty wasted, ambition poisoned by envy. Elena, however, walked into the final hearing like a woman reborn. She carried her son in her arms, her strength visible in every step. The courtroom, once a place of humiliation, was now her stage of triumph. The prosecutor announced that Adrian's last attempt at retaliation had failed. Offshore accounts were frozen, his allies indicted. He would spend decades behind bars, stripped of power, forgotten by the very society he once ruled. Adrian rose to speak, his voice bitter, his eyes bloodshot. "You think you've won, Elena? You only stand because of him," he sneered, nodding toward Victor. You're still nothing without a man protecting you. Elena stood, her son resting peacefully against her chest. Her voice was calm, steady, but carried through the room with unshakable authority. No, Adrian, I stand because I chose to. Victor stood beside me, yes, but I found my voice, my strength, and my dignity on my own. You tried to take everything from me, and still I rise. That's something you will never understand. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Capturing the moment, the once broken wife silenced the man who had destroyed himself. Later that night, back at the penthouse, Elena watched her son sleeping in his crib. Victor stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. For the first time in years, her heart was at peace. She kissed her son's forehead and whispered, "We're free now. Truly free." Victor's voice was soft, certain. "The past tried to break you, Elena, but look at you now. You've built something stronger than revenge. You've built a new life." Elena smiled through her tears, her soul finally unburdened. The scars of betrayal had become the proof of her strength, and the woman once discarded was now a queen in her own right. So that's it, my wonderful friends. The story has come to an end. And if you are still here with me at this very moment, it means something inside this journey has touched your heart in its own way. Elena's story wasn't just about betrayal and revenge. It was about resilience, healing, and the quiet power of choosing dignity over despair. Life will test us. It will hand us pain we don't think we can carry. People we trust may betray us. But as the Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, we cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them. Elena chose to rise. She chose to protect her child, reclaim her voice, and walk forward with strength. And that's a lesson we can all carry, whether in heartbreak, in struggle, or in moments when the world tries to silence us. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Elena's obstacles became her path. Every humiliation became a stepping stone. Every betrayal became fuel for her transformation. And isn't that true for us too? The scars we carry don't make us weak. They prove that we survived. So, as we close this story together, I want to leave you with this. Whatever you're going through right now, you are not powerless. You have truth. You have dignity. And you have the strength to rise, just as Elena did. If this story has stirred something in you, if it has reminded you of your own strength, I invite you to let it live beyond this video. Like it, share it with someone who might need the reminder, and subscribe so you never miss the next journey we take together. Because here we tell stories that heal, that inspire, and that remind us we are never truly alone. And now, from my heart to yours, may you carry Elena's courage into your own life, and may you always remember you are stronger than you think.